Hi music fans, this is Peter Skov from Music is a Journey. Today we're doing another episode of our first 10 albums of a band, and today we're going to be taking a look at the first 10 albums of Queen, whose debut album, self-titled debut album, was released on July 13th, 1973. Of course, the purpose of these videos are not only to take a look at those 10 albums, but also find out what was happening within the band and their surroundings over the course of the years during which those 10 albums were released. We have found already with other bands like Blue Oyster Cult, Aerosmith, Scorpions, Uriah Heep, and some others, how things changed in the band. And particularly I find that a lot of the events that happen within the band, the most significant events, tend to happen during the course of those first 10 albums, in a lot of cases anyway. So that's what we're going to take a look at today, is what was happening with Queen during that time. Now I gotta confess, so when I first started getting into music, which was around 1982, I was aware of Queen, kind of. I knew the song Another One Bites the Dust because a friend of mine across the street, he kept singing it. And of course we knew about We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You because, well, some of my friends who were really into sports were singing those songs, but I didn't really know who had recorded them, who Queen was, or anything about the band until The Works came out and Radio Gaga started getting played on all those late night video programs that I used to watch. And so that was really my formal introduction to Queen, Radio Gaga. And as I have said many times, and if you know me, 1984, I was totally into heavy metal and hard rock. So what did Radio Gaga do for me? Absolutely nothing. So I totally missed the boat on getting into Queen. Now, even of course by later on in the 80s, when I started exploring music of the early 70s, by that time, I was hearing Queen songs like It's a Kind of Magic or something like that. I mean, Queen were just not a band I had any interest in whatsoever during the 1980s. However, it did so happen several years ago, I kept hearing about how Queen were associated with progressive rock and that there was some association with hard rock. And so shortly before the Bohemian Rhapsody movie came out, I actually started exploring the band's catalog. And once it did come out, then I thought, okay, I'll get all the 70s albums, and I ended up getting them all anyway. But here, let's take a look. I think if I had had a different introduction to Queen, for example, if I had heard some things like this, or even just something like this, I'm pretty sure I would have taken up interest in Queen a lot earlier. Here, let's just, with those kinds of sounds in mind, I'd like to just take a quick look here at this issue of Cream from July 1975. There's an article here about Queen, talking about when they were first coming to play at the Aragon Club. There's a lot of talk here at the beginning, but there's a particular line over on page 70. There's plenty of heavy metal, enough to satisfy any boogeyman. But what a crafty way to slip in a little real professionalism into the boogies disguised as any band. Queen manages to rise above the fold with ingenious lyrics, inspired vocal explosions, and a buoyancy that will have you smiling before you know it. This going back to 1975, they're already mentioning a little bit about heavy metal with Queen. And here we have the, October 1979 issue, Is Heavy Metal Dead? And you'll notice that among the bands, including Van Halen, Boston, Kiss, Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, Led Zeppelin, and Heart, Queen is also down here. So at least during the 1970s and what heavy metal music was then, there was that perception that Queen also played heavy metal music. Of course, not every song, but enough songs that they were getting associated with that style. Let's take a look at the history. So of course we know that Brian May and Roger Taylor formed the band Smile together with Tim Staffnell. They also had a keyboard player back in the day, but he left after a while. Now, the Bohemian Rhapsody movie made it look like Tim quit the band and Freddie just happened to stroll by in the parking lot right afterwards and, get signed in as the new singer. But actually, Freddie was already friends of Tim and already knew about the band Smile and had an interest in singing lead for the band. However, I think it was Roger who was talking to him about it and felt, well, they didn't want to replace Tim as the vocalist and just, regale him to bass duties only. So Freddie was kind of kept back a little bit until Tim finally just decided he was going to quit the band altogether. So then Freddie was allowed to come in, and they also brought in a friend of somebody's anyway, to come in and play on bass. John Deacon didn't join in right away. And it was in June of 1970 where they played together for the first time with Freddie on vocals. And then Freddie suggested changing the name to Queen. And it was on July 18th, 1970 that they played their first concert together under the new name of Queen, playing a lot of Smile songs as well as a lot of old cover songs. They changed through a couple of bass players, and finally in February 1971, they brought in John Deacon. And now this is where, of course, all the excitement begins, because from here on, the band began recording demos of the material that they wanted to put on their first album. And so in 1971, I think it was at Delay Lane Studios, so gosh. Anyway, where they recorded a set of tracks which they had really hoped would be used for their first album. However, of course, they were having a bit of difficulty trying to get a deal, and they ended up signing with a production company called Trident, which had Trident Studios, which is really top-of-the-line studios. And the way it worked was that they would be able to use the studios at night for like a... I think they were able to just use the new studio even at night in order to help kind of test out equipment and so on. And then Trident, which was a production company, not a record label, would try to get the band signed to a record label. And this actually worked out really well for the band in the beginning because it meant they basically had free run of the studio during a certain period of the night hours where they did a lot of their experimentation. And the one thing that really made Queen stand out early on was that they decided to use the studio to make multiple tracks, particularly in vocals. Because of course you had Freddie Mercury on lead vocals there, but also Brian May, also lead vocalist on a number of songs back in the early days, and Roger Taylor, also very capable lead vocalist. And so they would often mix their vocals, multi-tracking vocals, in order to give that Queen choir-like feel to their music. So this actually started very early on. So as I said, it was finally, after a long wait, but finally on July 13th, 1970, the debut album Queen was released. And it's an interesting album. It has the first couple of tracks are left over from the Smile days. We've got Keep Yourself Alive and Doin' All Right, both songs figuring in the movie at the time there, where Freddie goes to the downstairs area, the basement area, and sees Smile performing. But then the next couple of songs, Great King Rat and My Fairy King, these start to explore the more fantasy type world that Freddie was interested in writing about at the time. And both these tracks are a little bit longer, like running around 6 minutes and going in multi-parts. Great King Rat features a little bit more of acoustic guitar in the midsection, whereas My Fairy King features a little bit more piano in the midsection. And then we go on with Liar, which is just a really good, powerhouse of a track. Night Comes Down, Modern Times Rock and Roll, a Roger Taylor song, Son and Daughter, a Brian May song, Jesus, kind of an interesting song about going down to see Jesus, and of course then the instrumental version of Seven Seas of Rye with the ellipsis afterwards, leading us on to the fact that there will be actually a song version to come later on in the future. Kind of a curious way to end an album with an instrumental that is a kind of lead-in to a song on the next album. The album got some fairly decent reviews. It was given a review as an above-average debut album by, I think it was the Chicago Tribune, and Rolling Stone actually said it was a really good debut, which is interesting because a lot of debut albums that have gone on to become classic albums like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath were totally slammed by the critics back in the day. But Queen seems to have been given a fairly favorable review. The only thing was that the album really didn't sell very much. So Brian May, in one documentary, recalls going to the stores and asking the store clerks, hey, have you got the new Queen album in yet? And the clerks kind of responding with, what? Who? And yeah, I think it was also Martin Popoff, critic and journalist. He's usually, his critiques of albums I find are usually very strong, and I disagree with pretty much all of them. But as a music historian, he's got a lot of interesting things to say. And I remember he said that back in the day, this was one really solid heavy guitar rock album. And yeah, it actually is. If you're familiar with Queen for all of their hit songs, you know, of course, like Bohemian Rhapsody, She's My Best Friend, Killer Queen, Somebody to Love, We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions, another one, Bites the Dust, and, you know, all of their popular hit songs, also from the 80s, you will be really surprised if you've never heard anything from this album before. It is quite a solid, heavy rocker for the day. And also, because of tracks like Great King Rat and My Fairy King, Great King Rat and My Fairy King, yeah, there's also a progressive element as well. The band then, of course, moved on back into the studio again, and in 1974, early 74, released their follow-up album, Queen 2. The photo, of course, here being the inspiration that led on to the Bohemian Rhapsody video, which used this kind of format of the band together like this. This album here, honestly, if I were to take only one Queen album with me, it would probably be this one. It is just really almost like a concept album, because a lot of the songs, again, are related to this fantasy world theme. We've got Procession, and then Brian May doing Father to Son, which is a nice melodic, thoughtful song about, you know, a father writing a letter to his son, and that his son would, you know, someday write the same words again to his future son. And this was Brian May thinking about, you know, someday in the future if he were to have a son. But it does feature a really heavy section in the middle there as well. And if you ever see the live performance of Queen live at the Rainbow in 1974, man, do they ever sound like a really heavy, hard rock band, because they play all their heaviest tracks and, you know, really solidly on stage. It's very impressive. If you want to associate Queen with early 70s heavy metal, you'll find it in that video. We've got the White Queen, and later on we've got March of the Black Queen later on the album, the March of the Black Queen. Some of these songs segue one into the next. Someday One Day is a little bit more mellower Brian May song, I think it is. Loser in the End is a Roger Taylor one about, you know, mothers, you've got to let your sons go out and do what they're going to do. If you try to hold them back, they're going to, you know, drop you basically. But we've got a great track opening side 2 called Ogre Battle. And, you know, when I just earlier in this video, I said if I had been introduced to Queen this way, I think it's the third track that I included a snippet of there. That is one of the riffs to Ogre Battle, which to me actually sounds similar to a riff that appears in Judas Priest's Victim of Changes 2 years later. So, yeah, pretty cool, heavy stuff there. Fairy Fellers, Master Stroke. Again, you know, following on this fantasy theme. Nevermore being a more gentle one. March of the Black Queen being kind of like a runner-up to Bohemian Rhapsody, an extended song with multiple parts, multi-track recording. Apparently, while recording that song, they ran the tape down so many times it was almost transparent. You know, whatever you saw in Bohemian Rhapsody about what they were doing with the song Bohemian Rhapsody, this was kind of like a runner-up to that, what they were doing, you know, the same kind of thing. Funny How Love Is, it's kind of tacked on after March of the Black Queen. I don't know why it segues into that. It's just weird because it seems to have nothing to do with it. And then, of course, Seven Seas of Rhye, which was a single which kind of got them a bit of attention. Enough attention that people started to see, hey, what's this band Queen and what are they up to? Okay, so then we move on to, let's see here, later in 1974, near the end of it, we come up with the third album, Sheer Heart Attack. And this is an album now that sees, it's a kind of transition point for Queen. There's still a couple of tracks like, what is it, Lily of the Valley and In the Lap of the Gods, which kind of still relate to these fantasy themes that were coming up on the first two albums. However, there are more songs now from kind of more personal experience viewpoints. Of course, Roger Taylor was kind of doing that early on anyway. We start with Brighton Rock, which now features the guitar solo that Brian May used to perform live. I think he used to do it during Son and Daughter from the first album. He would go into that guitar solo, but now they actually put it into the song Brighton Rock. There were some, let's see, some list somewhere about greatest guitar solos of all time where they recognized this one. Mostly it is a double-tracked guitar with some delay effects and some, you know, pretty cool guitar playing. After that, of course, Killer Queen, which is the song that landed the, what is it, #2 position in the UK and got them in the, I think it was the top 20 in the US, which, you know, was basically their breakthrough song, the song that, you know, now had the attention on both sides of the Atlantic for this band, Queen. We've got Tenement Funster, another Roger Taylor song, kind of a good fun rock song. Flick of the Wrist, a Freddie Mercury song, again a good solid rocker. Lily of the Valley, shorter, very light, pleasant one, very pretty. And Now I'm Here, I actually quite like Now I'm Here, and it's got this great guitar riff in it, you know, Brian May guitar riff. But I watched this reaction video the other day and the guy listened to it and he said, it's kind of just an okay song. Like, really? Alrighty, whatever. Yeah, and just moving on, In the Lap of the Gods. Now that is actually one that I don't really care for, but I think it is Roger Taylor who hits one of his highest notes ever singing on that one. And I think also it's later on the album, Freddie Mercury also hits one of his highest notes ever. I don't remember if it was this album or the next one. Stone Cold Crazy, that short, fast rocker of a song, which is sometimes cited as being, you know, kind of precursor to speed metal. Of course, during the 1970s, you could find songs like that here and there in bands' catalogs. But I think this one here, Stone Cold Crazy, it is a just really cool song that, you know, it never appeared in the kind of Queen top 20 type songs, but it is still, because of, you know, what came later on, it has earned its place as one of the key songs off the album. Dear Friends, I hardly remember. Misfire, which is the first song written by Roger Deacon to feature on a Queen album. And it's actually quite long. We've got 13 tracks here. Bring Back That Leroy Brown. I think that is just such a brilliant track. Now, I don't remember all the different styles of music that it features, but it is apparently largely based on what the kind of late 1920s style, but does also include bits and pieces of styles to come later. But it's just such a fantastic track with all that very fast-paced piano. We've got some, you know, upright bass coming in one part. We've got some, I don't know, banjo coming in. If you've never heard the song Bring Back That Leroy Brown, you should just go and check it out on YouTube. It is like, you know, of all those other styles that Queen did, where I think, oh yeah, they did a good job of it, but yeah, it's okay. I love this one. I can, you know, just get a kick out of listening to that one every once in a while. It's great. What do we got? She Makes Me, Stormtrooper and Stilettos. This is another Brian May song, kind of slower paced, almost like, I don't know, it seems like it's leading up to alternative rock. If you would take it a little bit more, you could almost push it into shoegaze and that kind of really steady, thudding beat, almost like a slow industrial type thing. But of course it's not any of those styles. It's just like, it feels like that seed is possibly ready to sprout, but maybe not quite yet. Yeah, and then In the Lap of the Gods Revisited, which is kind of more of a normal type song, whereas the first one was a little bit more of a experimental type with different things coming into it. So anyway, Sheer Heart Attack. Queen are now, as I said, they've got international attention. Yes, they went on tour in the US with Queen 2, touring with Mott the Hoople. Brian May getting very sick with hepatitis and actually not able to join in the Sheer Heart Attack recordings right away. He had to come in later on. But anyway, now with Killer Queen, of course they had the BBC performance, which, you know, they kind of made fun of that in Bohemian Rhapsody with "This is the BBC." But yeah, Queen is starting to make it really big now, and this is where things started happening. The first signs of trouble in the band, actually not the band themselves, but they found that they were, they had a hit song on the charts. They were touring the US. They should have been starting to make money, and the band was broke. There was one journalist, she said every time she went over to one of the band members' homes to interview them, she brought a bottle of wine because they couldn't afford one themselves. And Roger Deacon, getting married around this time, decided to ask the management if he could get an advance as a down payment on a house, and they refused him. So they're like, wow, well, what's the problem? And well, Trident said, we invested a lot of money in the band and we want to earn that money back first. All right, I suppose that's fair enough. I mean, that kind of thing happens, right? Record companies do invest a lot of money in bands, at least, in the 1970s they used to. But then it so happened that one of the people of Trident, whatever, they started, showing up with a fancy, expensive new car. And Roger Taylor was like, hang on a minute, now where's that money coming from? And so the band started to investigate a little bit more, and they discovered that Trident were basically just keeping almost everything for themselves and not giving hardly anything. It was like they got like £60 a week or something like that. That's where they decided they wanted to break ways with Trident. Trident, of course, not wanting to let go of their cash cow there. And so the band hired Jim Beach to come in as their lawyer. And I think, of course, he eventually also would later on take over management of the band, but it was John Reid, right? John Reid, the manager of Elton John, which they decided to get in as their new manager at the time. And this is kind of covered in the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. Of course, that movie does not stick with the exact facts sometimes and really bends the truth and other times, but some of the things they do get right. You watch the BBC documentary on Queen with interviews with Roger Taylor and Brian May in more recent years, and some of the old interviews back with Freddie and John Deacon and the others as well. There were some things that were actually accurate in the movie. Some of the things they almost took like directly from that documentary and put in the movie. But anyway, really tough time then, parting ways with Trident, and so that inspired the first track on the fourth album, A Night at the Opera, Death on Two Legs, which doesn't exactly state, was his name Norman Sheffield, who was the manager for them with Trident. It doesn't exactly name him, but basically he responded with a kind of a lawsuit for defamation, and that just kind of showed that he knew they were talking about him. Now, interestingly enough, around this time that Queen were really peed off about their situation, Black Sabbath were also trying to get out of their management as well. So that was around the time of the Sabotage album, and songs like Megalomania pointed out, are focused on their basically frustration with their former management, and so we had the same thing happening with Queen here on their fourth album. Now, the situation with the band was actually pretty down at the time. They were really in a kind of do-or-die situation, similar to Rush after Caress of Steel, by the way, except for that Caress of Steel did not do well at all, whereas Sheer Heart Attack got the band on the charts. So Brian May has said in the interview that this was basically the make it or break it album, and they really had to have this album take off as a hit, otherwise the band would probably just, disappear under the ocean, I think is what he said. But yeah, we've got, of course, Bohemian Rhapsody is on here. We've got You're My Best Friend, another John Deacon song, which was picked as a single. And I don't know if there was anything else on here that came out as a single, except maybe I'm in Love with My Car, which was also kind of talked about in the movie. But this is an album where Queen really explore lots of possibilities. Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, Seaside Rendezvous being these kind of more fun, older style songs. We've got Brian May's 39, which is a really sweet and, bittersweet story of, in the future, some people, they take off to explore the galaxy to find new worlds because the Earth is getting too crowded, and they return to Earth 100 years later. They have only been away for a year, but because of the time dilation effect, the Earth has aged 100 years, and the person singing the song comes back and finds, of course, his wife has long since passed away, and the old woman he meets is his daughter, and he sees his wife's eyes calling to him through his daughter's eyes. Yeah, it's really sweet, and it's a beautiful song. I really love that one. Sweet Lady, another Brian May song where they kind of made fun, like you called me sweet like I'm some kind of cheese. They made fun of that in the movie. Seaside Rendezvous I mentioned. One of the songs, Love of My Life, of course, one of the big concert songs. Again, in the movie, they talked about how they went to South America and just the whole audience of, tens of thousands of people were all singing the lyrics. Yeah, but I wanted to mention the Prophet song. Now, this was a song, some of the music was actually written back around the time of Queen 2, and during Brian May's illness period, prior to the beginning of the recording of Sheer Heart Attack, he had this dream about the Noah's Ark flood and about, giving a kind of warning about the earth. And so he wrote that song. It is, for me, it's a really cool one. It is one of Queen's last early heavy metal songs. It starts with some acoustic guitar as well as some toy koto, a kind of stringed instrument from Japan, which actually has its roots in China. But it goes on. The guitar is not really gritty or so on, but just the music, it's heavy. It's heavy, and it's it's talking about death everywhere and the end of the world kind of thing. So it's heavy lyrically, and the music itself is quite slow and plodding. It's got some good power to it. Then there's this middle a cappella section where Freddie is basically just singing everything, and it's echoed back 3 times. It's pretty cool at first. I do find it overstays its welcome, and that whole thing that now I know. Now I know, 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 now I know. Okay, all right, we get it. You know, fine, cool, all right, that's enough of that. But after that whole bit there, it then comes down into a heavy instrumental section where the guitar solo has a kind of a Led Zeppelin feel to it, and then gets back into the heavy punchy part with just a little extra punch to it before it wraps up with the acoustic thing again. Yeah, aside from the a cappella part going a little bit too long for my taste, it's a great song, and it is actually Queen's longest song recorded during the time that Freddie Mercury was alive. It runs to, I think, just over 8 minutes. So, pretty diverse album, famous for 2 or 3 tracks, but it's got a lot of stuff going for it, showing the band really stretching out. And of course, this was followed up with the kind of a part 2, a day at the races, a night at the opera, a day at the races. And this one here starts with Tie Your Mother Down, which was a Brian May song that he had actually written way back in the late 60s. Really good, hard rockin' song. Let me see here. We've got Long Away, which is also a Brian May song, which is another one of his kind of more prettier ones. I really like that one. And I think it has a kind of a Rickenbacker sound guitar, although apparently he didn't like the feeling of the neck of the Rickenbacker, so he actually kind of imitated the sound another way. Inspired by actually John Lennon's music. Pretty cool. Then there's the Millionaire Waltz. Again, this is one of Queen's, kind of more diverse styles, doing something a little bit different, but there is a good, heavy rock guitar section. This is saying thanks to John Reid, Freddie Mercury expressing really positive feelings about the band. Now the band finally actually reaping the rewards of all their efforts. They surrounded themselves with really good people by this time, with John Reid as their manager, Jim Beach as their lawyer, taking care of their contract things with Trident. They had Mike Stone as an engineer basically for most of their early albums, Roy Thomas Baker as producer on the first 4 albums until his contract with Trident ended and he was not the producer for a couple of albums but came back again. So basically they really surrounded themselves with good people, and by this time, the band was really becoming a huge success. We have Somebody to Love on here, which is of course one of the band's big classic songs. White Man, a song about Native Americans facing the European immigrants and what that meant for them and that kind of end of their way of life. And that is also a pretty serious, heavy rocking song. Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy, another one of these, fun Freddie Mercury type ones. Drowse, a Roger Taylor song. And then Teo Toriate, Let's Cling Together, a song Brian May wrote for the Japanese people after Queen had visited Japan, and with the part of the chorus actually sung in Japanese, and very well done. I think Freddie Mercury does a beautiful job of singing the Japanese lyrics. I actually get a little emotional when I hear them because, you know, I mean, I understand what he's saying, and it's good. It's good. I think Brian May writes some really nice sentimental songs from time to time. It's a beautiful song. So that is their fifth album, bringing us up now to 1977 for News of the World. The sixth album, of course, this one here opening with We Will Rock You, followed by We Are the Champions. So songs, We Will Rock You by Brian May, We Are the Champions by Freddie Mercury, both of these songs being big stadium type rock songs, you know, with audience participation. At this point here, the band are just absolutely huge. Third track, Sheer Heart Attack. Of course, reflecting the album title of the third album back from 1974. This is a song that was actually in the works at the time of the Sheer Heart Attack album. It is a Roger Taylor written, performed, sung song. I mean, I think he plays the guitars and the drums and does the lead vocals. I'm not sure if he played bass or not on this one, but there are some of the songs where Roger Taylor basically does just about everything. He's pretty much a one-man band just about at times. The guy's got talent like that. Anyway, it is a very speedy, basically punk rock styled song. And this is around the time also that, you know, they're signed to EMI, and so were the Sex Pistols. And so during some of the recording sessions for these here, they had those encounters where Johnny Rotten? No, it was Sid Vicious encounters Freddie Mercury and says something like, you know, have you succeeded in bringing the ballet to rock and roll? And Freddie Mercury says, we're trying our hardest, dear. And, you know, there was one thing where Freddie Mercury was playing piano and Johnny Rotten came like crawling in on his hands and knees really quietly and came under the piano and looked up and said, hello, Freddie. So, yeah, there was some kind of connection between them. I mean, you know, Punk and Queen were kind of really opposites, but I think there was a kind of good vibe between them, even though there were some of these kind of weird encounters. But yeah, Sheer Heart Attack is just a really fast-paced, punky type song. All Dead, Spread Your Wings, another John Deacon song, a very beautiful one. Fight from the Inside, another Roger Taylor song, and this has just got more of a groove, a kind of, you know, punchy groove to it with a nice bass intro. Really like that song there. Actually, it was my first favorite song from this album. I think this may have been the first Queen album I ever bought, actually, a few years ago. Get Down, Make Love, Sleeping on the Sidewalk, Who Needs You, It's Late, a longer 6-minute track or so by Brian May, going in like, I think it's like 3 different parts. I think he had the idea of writing almost like a mini rock opera with 3 parts to it, and again featuring some good hard rock guitar in there, and My Melancholy Blues. Some of the tracks on this album I don't really listen to very much, and others I think are really brilliant. But there we have, yeah, We Will Rock You, Queen, News of the World in 1977. So, of course, the band now just, you know, being one of the biggest bands around. We've got Jazz coming out in 1978, which actually doesn't really have any jazz on it. Starting off with Mustafa, which is a really weird song, sung in English, Arabic, was it Farsi, and maybe even some made-up words. Very peculiar song, but does kind of rock out pretty solid in places. Fat Bottom Girls, Brian May's, you know, kind of young boy fantasy about a girl a little bit on the heavy side. Jealousy, Bicycle Race. Now there is a fun song. That's a really fun song. That's great. And then they did that whole video with all these naked women riding on bicycles. Brilliant idea, again, of Brian May. If You Can't Beat Them, just a kind of fun melodic. I think it was a John Deacon song. Let Me Entertain You, really fast-paced, kind of, you know, a bit tricky in the guitar playing style song. Freddie Mercury talking. I think it was Freddie Mercury who wrote the lyrics about that one. Dead on Time, fast-paced again, rock song. You know, this album actually has less of that kind of more, you know, diverse stuff and more of a solid rock album, really, now that I'm looking at it here. In Only 7 Days, a kind of more prettier type song by John Deacon about having a 7-day holiday and meeting a lovely girl. Dreamer's Ball was a kind of dedicated to Elvis, actually, and that kind of more old style rock, I think. Fun It, Roger Taylor. Roger Taylor does some songs that are a little bit on the kind of unique side. Leaving Home Ain't Easy, another kind of pretty Brian May one. Don't Stop Me Now, classic Queen song again, and more of that jazz, another Roger Taylor song, which again does kind of get a little bit on the harder edge side from time to time. So that takes us, up to the first 7 albums. Queen is just doing great. They're in a really good position with good people around them. So far, it's just hit, and almost no misses. Critics are coming down pretty hard on some of their albums, though, lamenting that it's not as good as some of their past albums, or that there's just nothing on the album that really grabs critics' attention, but you know how critics are, right? So we come up to around 1980 with The Game. This one here, very similar to the last one, but starting to introduce a little bit more change in the style. Play the Game is one of those big Queen anthems by Freddie Mercury with the piano and the kind of more like, powerful stadium rock, mid-tempo type. Dragon Attack, a very funky, solid rocking track. We've got another one, Bites the Dust, and that song is kind of interesting because it is a pivotal song in the direction that Queen were going because of all the success they got from it, having that kind of more of a kind of dance funk type style to it. Need Your Lovin' Tonight, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, another great classic Queen song done in kind of more old style 50s rock and roll. Rocket, Prime Jive, another Roger Taylor. Don't Try Suicide is just a really goofy song. Don't try suicide, nobody's worth it. Weird. Sail Away Sweet Sister, another pretty Brian May rock song coming soon. And Save Me, another one of those big powerful anthemic Freddie Mercury type Queen songs. So again, we're looking at, the band just pumping out the rock songs, but, still not afraid to try some different things here and there. And having good success with it. However, it was that whole Another One Bites the Dust, and they went off to Munich to record the next album. And I think I should also mention that in between here, Wikipedia actually states that the official, where are we at? 8 albums. So I think it's the official 9th album is the soundtrack for the Flash Gordon movie. I don't have the album. I did listen to some of the tracks on YouTube, and I'm not going to count it as an actual Queen album because what it is basically is tracks of mostly incidental music for the movie. Of course, written and recorded by Queen, but there aren't really that many songs. Like, it's not a Queen song album. It's a lot of this kind of incidental music with sound effects or dialogue from the movie. So I'm going to ignore that one. We've got another band we're going to look at later on that did some soundtrack albums, but were essentially proper songs or at least proper instrumentals, not just incidental music. So, for Queen, we're not going to look at that. So they went off to Munich. Apparently they're recording in a very high-class studio, but on the basement level of a large building where people used to commit suicide. Brian May says it did kind of affect their thinking. Plus, they had this idea that they should try to go in a more dance-oriented direction, which both Roger Taylor and Brian May regret doing. Apparently, Paul Printer, Freddie's personal assistant, notorious in the film, was exercising more and more influence on the band. And as Brian May put it, he wanted Queen to sound like you had just walked into a gay bar. So not exactly happy days recording their 9th studio album, if you exclude Flash Gordon, Hot Space. So, this is an album I almost thought I didn't need to get. Staying Power is... It's that. Dancer, Backchat. It's like, wow, what happened to Queen? Now, Backchat is actually not so much a bad song. John Deacon having a love for African-American pop music, Motown, and whatever. So that's kind of coming out in this track. And it is well done. It's just... Is it Queen? Can we actually say what is and what isn't Queen? And then Body Language. Wow, okay. Yeah. But we come to Action This Day, a Roger Taylor song. That's kind of interesting. Put Out the Fire, a Brian May song, the one guitar rock song on the album. Life is Real is a song for John Lennon, which actually does have a kind of John Lennon-inspired feel to it. Calling All Girls, kind of a pop rocker, but the chorus is pretty strong. Little bit reminding me of Nazareth 2XS, also recorded in 1982. Then we've got Las Palabras de Amor, the Words of Love. This is I think it was a song kind of Brian May reaching out to the fans in Argentina during the time of the Falklands War. You know, a lot of British musicians had big fans down in South America and Argentina as well, and it really hurt them to know that, you know, their country was at war and that Argentinian fans of their bands were dying. Rick Wakeman mentions it in one of his books, and Brian May also, you know, wrote a song basically trying to show his appreciation for the fans in Argentina in spite of what was going on. But yeah, after that kind of run of 5 tracks, which are, yeah, okay, that sounds a little bit more like Queen. Then we've got Cool Cat, which is just another one of their early 80s funky, dancey type songs. And then we finally get Under Pressure, which was actually recorded previously, ahead of the recording sessions for this, with David Bowie, where they were just kind of, you know, goofing around in the studio together, and then decided, why don't we try to do something? John Deacon starting to play that do 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 do, you know, and then they all went out for pizza, and when they came back, John couldn't remember what he had played, but Roger remembered. And yeah, they worked together to put the song, and Under Pressure came out, which is included here on the album, but as I said, it was recorded in a previous recording session prior to the recording of the rest of this album. This album, yeah, had a lot of people questioning what the heck were Queen doing. Fans of the band's, you know, previous albums were wondering what we're now getting, like a dance funk band here. What's going on? And it took some time for the band to kind of think, what are we going to do now? And at this point in the game, things are starting to get shaky. Paul Prenter having a large influence on Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury basically becoming a party animal in Munich. And yeah, whatever problems were going on in the band, whatever things there might have been with any, you know, alcohol, substance abuse, whatever. But we also see that this is a time where the bands start to need some time apart. And we have Brian May doing the, what was it, the Star something project with some other guitarists, other musicians. We have Roger Taylor doing his solo album, and Freddie Mercury getting an offer to do a solo album, where the offer for the advance was larger than anything that had been offered for any Queen album, which is also pointed out in the movie. And at this point, the band is kind of starting to pull apart a little bit. However, they did get their act together for their 10th Queen album, excluding, of course, Flash Gordon, The Works, coming out in 1984, and with Radio Gaga giving them a big hit, they were again now back on the charts and back in the attention of everyone. This album, we've got songs like Tear It Up and Hammer to Fall, Brian May rocker songs. It's a Hard Life, again, one of these more kind of mellower Freddie Mercury type things. What have we got? Keep Passing the Open Windows, which was actually also meant to be for a movie soundtrack, but ended up being just one song. Is This the World We Created? The closing track, questioning about, you know, starvation in the world and the way people suffer. Machines, getting a little bit on the experimental side. I Want to Break Free. Now this, of course, being the second big hit off the album, but this is where things kind of got wonky again. Roger Taylor decided, let's do a video based on the hit British soap opera Coronation Street. The song was John Deacon's. Roger Taylor got the idea for the video that they should all dress up in drag. However, it seemed that Freddie Mercury dressing in drag got the biggest flack, and suddenly it did not go over well in America at all, and America just like cooled its jets on the band. And that just did not sit well with Freddie Mercury and the rest of the band too. But Freddie Mercury said, basically, I'm not going to tour America unless we get another hit song there. And Brian May saying, well, we need to tour America to get a hit song. Basically, by touring America, we're going to get their attention and sell more albums. Freddie said, no, we're not touring unless we have a hit song there. And at this point here now, there is just a lot of tension in the band. And the band, you know, we've reached the 10th album and they've been doing really well, but it's down here at the end, stuff is starting to fall apart. Freddie Mercury leading the wild life. Apparently Jim Beach, I think it was, said to him at one point, like, this new disease that's coming out, we don't have a word for it yet. Are you taking any precautions? And Freddie just saying, I am doing everything with everyone, darling. Yeah, And this is where basically our story should end after the 10th album, but it is kind of interesting to note that basically Queen were almost together but not together until they got that call about doing Live Aid. And it was the Live Aid performance that once again like really got attention on the band, and they were able to continue on through the 80s recording a couple of more albums. But of course also Freddie getting diagnosed with being HIV positive, and that being kind of the downslide. So we see Queen regaining their position as a top rock band for the rest of the 80s, but at the same time it's coming to an end now because their fabulous flamboyant lead singer is ill and doesn't have that much longer to be around. But anyway, that is the first 10 albums of Queen. Interesting story how the band struggled for a bit, had some success, fought their way through with a change of management, hit the smooth road where they were just doing like only the critics didn't like them. And then, you know, like we saw with so many bands, by the 10th album, if there haven't been any major problems before then, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there, problems start to appear. So even with the mighty Queen, they actually did experience that. But they also managed to get over it. And interestingly enough, from the time that they actually became Queen to the time that Queen basically came to an end, it was the same 4 members the whole time. Other bands we've looked at have seen lineup changes, not in the case with Queen. But there we go, first 10 albums of Queen. That wraps up this video. It's July. I've actually got 2 more bands to look at in July, so you'll probably see another video coming out within a week, and then another one within a week after that, if I have time. Kind of busy this month, but we'll see. Alright, thanks for watching. Leave a comment if you wish, leave a like if you wish, and see you in the next video. Take care all. Bye.